Hello, my name is Edgar Roberts, and I will be talking about the ethical dilemmas of the Planned Parenthood controversy. So, recently in the news, there's been this issue with Planned Parenthood, and there's been a couple of videos posted from anti-abortion groups that showed a Planned Parenthood executive and I think a director talking about how the organization provides fetal organs and tissue to researchers. And I'm going to be coming at this with a couple different theories, a couple of different normative theories. One is consequentialist, and the other non-consequentialist. So some of the dilemmas we're going to be talking about is ethical to use the remains of aborted fetuses for medical research, and are we willing to use others without their consent to help ourselves? And also, if the results are good, then isn't it morally right to use aborted fetal organs and tissue for research? So we're going to be talking about some of these dilemmas using the different ethical theories. So if you're a consequentialist, then you believe that the moral rightness of an action is determined solely by its results. If the consequences are good, then the act is right, and if they're bad, then the act is wrong. So basically, whatever the outcome is, if it's good, then the way you went about getting it is morally right. And there's a couple of different types of consequentialist theories. When we'll talk a little bit about egoism and utilitarianism. So egoism is the views that equates morality with self-interest. And so basically, if an action produces more good for somebody than another action, then that action is the morally right one to perform. And um, to take this in with what's going on with the ethical dilemma of what's going on with Planned Parenthood, if what they're doing best promotes the person doing it self-interest, then it's the morally right thing to do. Um, but that does not sit well with most people, and most people will not agree with that. Utilitarianism. So this is the moral doctrine uh, that we should always try to produce the greatest possible balance of good over bad for everyone affected by our actions. And when they are talking about good, they mean happiness or pleasure. There's other things that kind of go along with that. So basically, if it if the overall balance of good over bad for everyone is good, happy, brings happiness and pleasure to everyone, then it's the morally right thing to do. And there's what you call act or rule utilitarianism, which is, we need to was what the question we have to ask ourselves, asking what the consequence of a particular act are in a particular situation will be for everyone affected. And so in this situation, some would say a utilitarianist would probably say that what's going on with Planned Parenthood is the morally right thing to do because they believe um, that the overall good outweighs the bad for everyone affected by the action because they believe it's helping research and to cause us to be able to come up with new medicines and things with the research that's being done with these aborted fetuses. Um, so there you go. And this is just utilitarianism continued, talking about how they believe there's just a strive for maximized happiness, and it may not be immediate, but in the long run, it should bring maximized happiness. And every result depends on the circumstance, or different results depend on each circumstance. And also, we may not know with certainty what the future consequences of our actions will be. And also that we're supposed to try to produce the greatest amount of happiness, and that may mean pain and unhappiness might have to come into play to get that our greatest amount of happiness. And the focus is more on the results of an action rather than the character of the action itself. So in this situation, they would say that if the results are good with what they're doing, then it doesn't so much matter with the character of the action, but if the results are good, that's what they're striving for. Now we're going to talk about non-consequentialist theories, and this is where you believe that right and wrong are determined by more than the lack of consequences of an action. There's more reasons, and the nature of the act is in question, not just the results. And there's a couple of different theories for this. We're going to talk about. We're going to hit on one or two, and we'll go into a little more detail about that. Kant's ethics. Kant's believed that the moral reasoning isn't based just on factual knowledge and observation, but and the results of our actions don't determine whether they're right or wrong. But nothing is good in itself except goodwill. That's what he believed, and it's only when we act from a sense of duty does our action have moral worth. And when he talks about goodwill or will, he's talking about the uniquely human capacity to act from principle. And so this can go a couple different ways. One may say that they're acting out of duty to do anything they can to provide researchers with more things to be able to research with. Or it can go another way, where someone may believe it's their duty to end abortion, and by what's going on, people may be wanting to have more abortions because they believe they're benefiting research. And so if you're using Kant's ethics, you can take this either way, because he doesn't believe that we don't have to know the results of what is going to happen, but more out of reason alone and what you feel like your principle and duty is. W.D. Ross had a pluralistic ethical perspective that differed from utilitarianism, and he rejected Kant's belief that our moral obligations are absolute and without exceptions, but believed that an obligation can be overridden by something that's more important, an obligation that's more important than what they felt like their other obligation was. So an obligation that's not necessarily absolute can in principle be outweighed by a more stringent moral obligation. So for example, a person who may feel like it's their moral obligation to provide research, and by using these aborted fetuses for that, they may feel like an obligation that's more important or more stringent. But maybe, for instance, if they believe that the fetus is a living person, and that person should have a right and cannot be used for research, that obligation becomes more important and is overridden by the other obligation. All right, and now we're going to talk about the consequences of consequentialism, and we'll talk about the consequences of non-consequentialism. But the first is this is an idea that permits us to treat humans as means to an ends. So they may, someone who is a consequentialist may feel like they can use people and humans and these fetuses as means to an ends because it betters everyone rather than the person being used, which is sad. It also puts emphasis on the results of an action, not the character of the action itself. And no action is in itself objectionable. So this is messed up because character is obviously very important, and if it can put by believing in consequentialism, you can put more emphasis on the results instead of the character. And another consequence of this is that critics would say that it's not only permits, but sometimes even requires us to perform immoral actions. So even if somebody does believe that fetus is a living and breathing person, they may still feel like they are required to perform something immoral by killing the baby and using it for research. Now let's talk a little bit about the consequences of non-consequentialism. And one of the consequences of this is what can seem to be very obvious and self-evident in one culture at one time in history can turn out to be not only self-evident but actually false, because cultures change, things in history change, and so what may seem to be very obvious at one point in time could have been completely different at another point in time. And it may also be very hard to satisfactorily handle conflicting rights and principles. So for instance, back then if he talked about abortion and the things that's going on with Planned Parenthood, it would have been very obvious and very self-evident that this is wrong and immoral. But today's history, it's become less that way and less obvious, and so that's one instance of where things can change. So I'm going to talk a little bit about and just mention the issue of pro-choice and pro-life because this issue can come down to that, whether you are pro-life or pro-choice, and whether you believe these babies are alive or not and are living, because it can, depending on the way you think and the way you believe, it can change your whole reasoning on ethics. We're going to talk a little bit about rights. We're going to mention the aspect of legal rights. Is what they're doing legally right? Because it's been said that some people would accuse them of selling these parts, and if this is true, they are selling them, then it is legally wrong. If they're not selling them, which they say they're not, they're just covering the cost of shipping and things, then it may not be legally wrong. Then you have moral rights, which usually deals with the roles rights, relationship rights, circumstance rights, or even rights to life, free speech, and unhampered religious affiliation. If you believe a baby is a human being that's been still in the mother's womb and fetus, then they should have a moral right to life, and by what's going on, their life has been taken away from them. So that's something that you have to think about. Then you also have human rights, and this isn't in the sense that it's derived from like a study of human nature, but it's more of a sense of that you don't have to depend on any kind of human institution in the way of like legal rights do, but you just have a right because you are a human being and you're living, and so these rights are universal, they're equal and unalienable, and are natural. And so this all comes down to the question again that if a fetus is a living thing and a person and a human being, then they should have these rights that are universal and equal and unalienable, and they should have they have rights and they should not be taken away from them. So there you go. That's the end of my PowerPoint presentation. I hope you learned some about the ethical dilemmas involved with what's going on with Planned Parenthood, and learn more about consequentialist theory and a non-consequentialist theory and the way they think. And here are my resources. I just used the book Business Ethics 8th edition, and here's a couple other different links of where I use some material. Thank you very much.